Hello, welcome to the 27th episode of Criminal Profiling. This week we continue with the topic of family. As a quick recap, last week we looked at the sun sign totals, and we separated the sun signs into those who murdered their wife, those who murdered their husband, and those who also included their children in the murder. Some of the outstanding points there were in the sun sign totals, in which we found all four cardinal signs at a high score. And those cardinal signs, of course, are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And they all had 10, whereas one of the cardinal signs, Aries, had 11. Another outstanding sign that was not a cardinal sign, was actually a fixed sign, was Scorpio, which also had 10. According to statistics, women murder their husbands more for money. It can be money, insurance. It can be revenge. A husband is having an affair if they believe the husband is having an affair. And sometimes it's adultery, where the woman is in fact having an affair and she wants to get rid of the husband. And generally insurance comes in at that point as well. Regardless, in any three instances, whether it's insurance or other people's money or sex or infidelity or revenge, the sign Scorpio includes all three. And when we looked at the murder of husbands with the wives, of course, we got that Scorpio standing out for the sex, revenge, insurance, or other people's money as a number 5, which would be expected. For those not familiar with astrology, this is pretty clear indication of how well it works. Okay, let's get on with part 2. We're going to be looking at the quadruplicities of the zodiac, and they consist of cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs. So the zodiac, consisting of 12 signs, or your 12 zodiac signs, are separated into groups of 4. And the cardinal signs are leading in this case at 41. The cardinal signs consists of Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. You'll note that they were the 4 outstanding signs in last week's episode in the sun sign totals. So what we're seeing here with the cardinal being at 41 is we're seeing signs Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn making that outstanding appearance again. So we can now separate these into the murders of wives and husbands. Let's take a look at the quadruplicities of the husbands who killed their wives. And remember, in the last week, we found that husbands, their big thing was Capricorn as the leading sun sign. And in this case, we get cardinal signs, which does involve and include Capricorn as control and power and greed, which we saw last week. So these are the leaders of the husbands who kill their wives. So we should see this. Now, with the murder of the husbands, with the wives, last week with the sun signs, we saw Scorpio take the lead, kind of. And then this week, we see fixed signs instead of cardinal signs taking the lead when it comes to women. There's a complete difference from the men. The men were the cardinal at 15, and now we get women with this fixed sign at 9, and cardinal is only at 5. But the fixed sign includes Scorpio, and that is a fiery part of water. And it rules things like insurance, revenge, sex, the things we talked about where they were outstanding last week for women. They are outstanding here with the quadruplicities. Again, it shows how effective astrology is when you separate them and apply them. In this case, we're applying it to science. We're applying it to the statistics as put out by the FBI. The FBI statistics I refer to are those that involve the majority reason for men killing their wives and children, or for women killing their husbands or husbands and children altogether. Those statistics. And once again, children are not generally the focus for familicide or the reason behind familicide. They are generally a victim of familicide. The primary reasons being revenge, altruism. The motivators or stressors, of course, are unemployment, divorce, or breakup. Okay, moving along, we're going to take a look at the triplicities of the zodiac insofar as it relates to Chapter 1 of Murders Within the Family. Triplicities separate the zodiac into 4 categories: fire, water, air, and earth, so that you have 3 signs in each category. For fire, you'll have Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. For water, you'll have Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. For air, you'll have Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, and for Earth you'll have Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. The winner in every instance in this case is water. For the total, it wins at 26 for the 86 charts. Then when you separate it into those husbands who killed their wives or wives and children, water wins at 8. For the murder of husbands or wives who murdered their husbands or husbands and children, water again at 8. For the children, we see water rise to its highest number, the number 10, which reflects both the high degree of Scorpio with the women, as well as including altruism. Keep in mind that family itself is ruled by Cancer, which is a water sign. So knowing that children are not the focus of familicide in general and by large, we can now look at this number 10 in the water for children, as reflecting Cancer itself, and Cancer is the family. So we completed the sun signs where we found the sun was in Aries 11 times, the majority. All 4 cardinal signs were represented, as well as Scorpio, where we had 4 signs at number 10. As far as the moon, we can't rely too heavily on that because there's no times of birth for a lot of those charts. There's only 25 charts in chapter 1 with times of birth. With Mercury, the mental mind, we find the majority of Mercury is in Capricorn. And that, of course, covers a lot of what the males had, the control or the greed and stuff like that. And so Mercury is in Capricorn more than any other sign. Venus is in Gemini and Virgo 12 times, more so than any other sign. Gemini and Virgo. For Venus, for Mars, the planet of war, we find him in Sagittarius 11 times. Sagittarius being a fire sign, it can put people into an action mode pretty quick. So that's an interesting one because we don't hear too much from Sagittarius throughout. Let's see, for Jupiter, Jupiter is in Cancer and Virgo 11 times each. For Saturn, he's in Gemini 14 times. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the popular aspects in Chapter 1, and this can give some of the more common thinking patterns that we see in these types of cases. Okay, starting with the Sun. We get the Sun conjunct Jupiter 12 times. This reflects philosophies, people's philosophies, religions, ethics, morals. So when someone feels double-crossed or something, it's usually Jupiter in there. However, the Sun is square Saturn 14 times, 2 more times than the Sun is conjunct Jupiter. The Sun square Saturn reflects the high level of lack of empathy or psychopathy among these offenders. The Sun is also opposite Uranus 9 times. For the opposition, we get Uranus at 9 times. That's the reckless behavior, the spontaneous violence that can erupt. Uranus reflects impulsive actions. When you separate the aspects into the murder of wives and the murders of husbands, you get completely different results. For the murder of wives from the husbands, we get the Sun conjunct Moon 4 times, strong identification with the wife, but we also get the Sun square Neptune, which is showing now the deception is starting to come out. Those things they wanted to keep hidden are coming out in these aspects. Also, the opposition to Uranus at 5. Uranus again plays a big part in the oppositions, and this represents that sudden changes in their relationship, sudden change of heart, recklessness, impulsive actions. Whereas for the murder of husbands, we get the women with the Sun conjunct Jupiter, strong moral ethic and philosophical religious stuff coming out here. But we also get, and even more importantly, the Sun square Mars and Saturn at 4 each. Those are the higher numbers. This shows not only women who can be a little bit more violent, but also there's also some greed and control issues coming in there. We don't know if that's the reflection of the men's control and the reaction to that control. So, for example, Betty Broderick, she had a bad temper, and she was known to have a bad temper, so she would show up here. This is probably part of her statistic as well. Let's see, for Mercury, the most conjunctions for all 86 charts was a conjunction to Mars, the planet of war, violent mind. So remember, the Mercury is the mind, and it's conjunct Mars 9 times. So it shows a violent state of mind in many of these people, bad-tempered people. We also get Mercury square Mars as the most popular square, along with Uranus and Pluto. These are very dangerous aspects, and this shows the mind as turning towards violence or being impulsive or irrational, turning irrational, or wanting to destroy things in a really big way, to take down the entire family, perhaps, or something like that. That's the Plutonian energy there. But this is quite telling for the mental mind. For the oppositions, we had 4 oppositions from Neptune showing the deception. For Mercury, the murder of wives, we saw the conjunction of Mars and Jupiter being the most, but only at number 2. So again, it's showing the morals and philosophies. People feel that they've been wronged or whatever. And there's violence. So the two of them combined in that. Mercury square Mars and Pluto for men for the murder of their wives. Again, that is violence and very much controlling. A control comes in a big way there, and how to remake others and controlling other people's lives. And the opposition is to the moon in this case, where they're having difficulty with the feminine, the mother symbol. For the women killing their husbands, Mercury is actually conjunct the moon or Uranus. So it's sometimes it's impulsive for them. Oftentimes it's emotional reaction, which could be anger as well. Because the children were not the focus, I'm not going to be delving into the children, and too much can be read into it, which isn't there. Because this is much like profiling. You still have to apply logic to your statistics and stuff like this. Let's see, for our planet of attraction, for all 86 charts in Chapter 1, we get Venus conjunct Saturn as the outstanding one. In Saturn, again, that's showing the lack of empathy, the psychopathy, and the control, all kind of coming out there with Venus conjunct Saturn 10 times. Venus is also square Uranus 8 times, and there's those powerful attractions that can lead to affairs. It can also represent impulsive actions, so those two things are kind of playing out here, as well as Venus in opposition to Uranus at 6 times. So Venus and Uranus combinations are quite prominent in these charts, with 8 squares to Uranus and 6 oppositions to Uranus with Venus. When you separate them into the murders of wives and husbands, you get the Venus conjunct Saturn and Uranus, showing that control and the spontaneous reaction from some of them that can result in murder and things not thought out and just acting on impulse. Again, we have the Venus square Uranus. Oh, so Uranus is again showing in for the murders of wives with the husbands. And it's showing that impulsive, strong attraction. So it's bringing in the affairs and the powerful attractions and the impulsiveness. The murder of husbands from the wives, we have Venus conjunct Jupiter, philosophy, religion, morals, ethics, things like that are being broken by either party. Lack of empathy is showing up for the Venus square Saturn, 3 for the women. There's a lack of women empathy shown here as well, and possibly some greed or psychopathy for the women. And then the Venus opposition, we get Venus opposition Uranus, impulsive actions again, or strong attractions. For Mars, the planet of war, we get conjunction to Mercury 9 times for all the charts. So that's a bad-tempered people, a lot of with people with violent tempers and stuff. Mars square Saturn and Pluto 8 times. And so this is where it's showing a lot of the more the aggressive violence, the control, the extreme violence and possessiveness of Mars square Saturn and Pluto really shows up. As far as the oppositions, we have Mars opposition Moon and Jupiter at 7. Again, that's showing there's some cruelty there. There's some anger, emotional anger, philosophy, religion coming into it. People's ethics or their morals and stuff like that are coming into play here. For the murder of wives, we have Mars conjunct Pluto at 3. This is the control, extreme aggression, murder, destructive behavior and stuff in a few of them. For the murder of the wives, when it comes to Mars, watch for Mars and Pluto. That's a very bad combination there. For the murder of the husbands for Mars, we see them being more deceptive with Mars conjunct Neptune at 3. So there's poisonings and stuff perhaps going on in there. Deception, secret affairs. And we also get the Mars square the Sun for women who kill their husbands. Anger toward husbands is shown here. Bad-tempered people can be shown here. Sun square Mars, that could be like, again, your Betty Broderick's and people who have pretty bad tempers out there. And then Mars opposite Moon. For the oppositions, they get Mars opposite Moon at number 3, 3 of them. Mood swings and stuff like this, anger, pure anger of the moods and stuff like this. And that's what that's showing, some people who've been wronged and they're just super mad. Let's see, Jupiter is in conjunct aspect with the Sun 12 times. Here, narcissism is rearing its head. There's a lot of narcissism in that. So there's a lot of narcissism playing out. What else do we have? The squares. Jupiter square Saturn and Pluto. Again, here's those narcissism, control, restricting behavior probably on the women especially. There's all kinds of things represented in that because it's taking so many things into account. The violence, the control, the greed, everything is kind of coming out there. And for Jupiter opposite, we have Jupiter opposite Moon and Neptune leading the way at 7 each. And that is basically, again, it's coming into more deception and stuff, planning and deception and actual conscious deception of planning to hurt someone perhaps, and conscious maybe setting up a murder, things like that can come into play. Misunderstandings, thinking someone's having an affair when they're not. Religion, warped thinking. A lot of things come out in that one. For the murder of the wives, there's nothing to be said about Jupiter conjunctions. There's really no Jupiter conjuncts. Jupiter square for the men, we get Jupiter square Neptune. That's the planning for the deception of Jupiter square Neptune for the men. Jupiter opposite Moon for the men. Again, they're struggling with the feminine stuff here. Morals, ethics are coming into play. For the murder of the husbands, Jupiter conjunct Sun and Neptune. This is a narcissism. This is planning, but it's narcissism, greed. For the squares, we have Jupiter square Mars for the women. Again, that's that violence. Those who have violence, Jupiter square, they take to violent reaction. So they philosophize violently and they plan violently, and there's violent planning. Again, that might be your Betty Broderick types. Jupiter opposite Saturn for the oppositions. Saturn at 2, religion, philosophies, restriction, control. There's a little bit of that in there, or greed. Lastly, we have Saturn. All 86 charts, the majority was Saturn conjunct Venus at 10. Again, we've already covered that under Venus conjunct Saturn. That's that lack of empathy, psychopathy that's so prevalent in these types of, there's some serial killers involved in chapter 1, of course, but it's that lack of empathy that's really standing out. And then we have Saturn square the Sun at 14, that's the highest. Saturn square the Sun at 14 is the biggest. That's really where your narcissism, lack of empathy, psychopathy, all of that is coming out full force here. Saturn opposite Pluto, that is where things go way too far for cruelty, complete domination leading to murder, that sort of thing. For the murder of the wives, we had Saturn conjunct Venus. Again, that is coldness and controlling the woman, the wife. That's really what that's talking about, control of the wife, coldness, lack of empathy, cruelty. And then we have Saturn square Mars and Neptune for the men. That not only is deception showing there, but cruelty, physical, mental cruelty, violence, all that comes out. It's sort of in the particulars is when they get right into it. They can be some pretty cruel guys in there. Saturn opposite Pluto. Again, that is completely dominating, cruel, out of control domination that leads to murder, obsession, that type of thing. So for the women, for Saturn, we had nothing outstanding with Saturn conjunct planets, but we do have Saturn square the Sun at 4 times, and that is a lack of empathy too, or greed. There's a Saturn opposite Mars and Jupiter, so there's a little bit of maybe even cruelty there. There's a little bit of frustration. There's lashback on the morals, ethics part with Jupiter, and philosophy, religion comes into it. So that's a little bit of juggle between some people being wronged and some people being violent and taking a violent reaction to things out of hurt or wanting to people suffer the way they've suffered. And that's Saturn opposite maybe Mars. And that concludes the statistics I wanted to go over. Next week, we're going to be continuing with the topic of family, but now we're going to be looking into the individual charts and comparing family murderers. Very interesting topic and charts. So I'll look forward to that, and we'll see you next week.